This time, I will look at the history of relations between Japan and South Korea. What kind of relationship do your country and its neighbor have? Are they on good terms? In most cases, neighboring countries maintain important relationships but are not particularly friendly with each other, isn't that right? Japan and South Korea also have such a relationship. Last time, I introduced the relationship between Japan and Korea during the Meiji Restoration period. This time, I will explain the relationship between Japan and Korea during the First Sino-Japanese War. During the Meiji period, Japan increased its involvement in Korea. Japan had two objectives in targeting Korea. One was to acquire Korean interests, and the other was to secure Korea as a buffer zone against Russia's southward expansion. In particular, Japan's decision to wage a war against Russia, which it had no hope of winning, was based on a strong sense of crisis that if Russia took Korea, Japan would be next. On the other hand, there were two factions in Korea. One faction, the pro-China faction, continued to rely on Qing as its suzerain state and sought to survive as a vassal state of Qing. The other faction, the independence faction, sought to modernize like Japan after the Meiji Restoration and open the country with the help of Japan. Kim Ok-kyun, leader of the independence faction, had studied in Japan and developed a close friendship with Yukichi Fukuzawa. Through Fukuzawa's introduction, he also established ties with Japanese political circles. He dreamed of bringing about a Meiji Restoration in Korea. In the 1882 Imo incident, Queen Min strengthened ties with Qing China and formed a government aligned with the pro-Qing faction. Queen Min stationed 1,800 Qing troops in Hansong. Kim Ok-kyun was dissatisfied with this decision. In 1884, Qing China went to war with France over Vietnam. Kim Ok-kyun figured that while France was busy fighting, Japan wouldn't mess with Korea, even if it was trying to get involved in the Korean issue. So, he planned a coup to wipe out the pro-Qing faction in Korea. 150 Japanese soldiers stationed in Hansong participated in this coup. However, just before the coup was carried out, Qing was defeated in battle against France and began seeking peace negotiations. When news of the coup in Korea reached Qing, they took action to protect Korea. With 1,300 Qing troops and 150 Japanese soldiers, the battle was no contest, and the coup failed. Kim Ok-kyun fled to Japan. This coup d'état is known as the Gapsun coup. Yuan Shikai of the Qing dynasty crushed the coup by force and became the de facto dictator of Korea. As part of the aftermath of this incident, both Qing and Japanese forces withdrew from Korea, which pleased Russia, which had been eyeing Korea. As a result of this incident, Korea deepened its relationship with Qing China, and the main members of the Independence Party, who had relied on Japan's power to start a revolution, were either executed or fled into exile. As a result, Japan lost an opportunity to strengthen its involvement in Korea. This led to a growing sentiment that Japan had no choice but to fight Qing China in order to secure its interests in Korea. However, when the Gapsun coup occurred, even the Japanese government leadership was well aware that Japan did not yet have the strength to fight Qing China. This incident prompted Japan to embark on a program of military buildup, with Qing China as its hypothetical enemy. In addition, the Japanese government concealed the fact that it had secretly supported Kim Ok-kyun's coup d'état and spread reports that Qing troops had massacred Japanese residents in Korea. This greatly heightened anti-Qing sentiment among the Japanese people and increased support for war against the Qing dynasty. Politically, there were no significant ties between Japan and Korea, but economically, Japan had a major influence. Nearly 90% of Korea's exports went to Japan, and Korea exported soybeans and rice to Japan. This trade with Japan brought in foreign currency, and some people profited greatly from it. However, for the general population, it meant exporting their already scarce grain, causing grain prices in Korea to rise even further and making life even more difficult for the people. The Min clan, which held political power, did nothing to reform the government. From the 1880s, the People's Party led to frequent uprisings. In 1894, a large-scale peasant rebellion broke out. This was the Gatsun Peasant War. The rebellion spread throughout the country. On May 30th, the shocked Queen Min requested that the Qing dynasty send troops to suppress the rebellion. On June 2nd, upon learning of the Qing dynasty's decision to send troops, Japan immediately decided to send troops to Korea as well. This was because, according to the treaty, if a problem arose in Korea, both the Qing dynasty and Japan would send troops to Korea. The Korean leadership, including Queen Min, was surprised by the confrontation between the two armies and hastily negotiated peace with the rebel forces, bringing the rebellion to an end. Korea then requested that both armies withdraw, but neither Japan nor Qing China agreed. Japan argued that the internal strife in Korea had not yet ended and proposed to Qing that the two countries jointly carry out administrative reforms in Korea. Qing rejected Japan's proposal and demanded the simultaneous withdrawal of both armies. In response, on June 24, Japan informed Qing that it would proceed with reforms in Korea on its own and notified Qing of the severance of diplomatic relations. Then, on June 30th, Japan dispatched additional troops to Korea. At the same time, Japan continued negotiations with Britain and, after confirming that Britain would remain neutral if Japan went to war with Qing, decided to go to war with Qing. In addition, in exchange for installing Daegun as the leader of Korea, Japan had him write a letter requesting the expulsion of Qing troops, thereby gaining a justifiable cause. On August 1, 1894, after driving the Qing troops out of Hansong, Japan formally declared war. Details of the war will be omitted here, but there was a significant difference in military strength between the westernized Japanese army and the old-fashioned Qing army. By February 1895, the Japanese military had completely secured control of the Yellow Sea and Bohai Sea, enabling it to safely dispatch troops to mainland China. With the route from Beijing to Tianjin left completely exposed, the Qing dynasty lost its will to fight. In April 1895, Japan and Qing China signed a peace treaty, in which Qing China recognized Korea's independence, and Korea became an independent nation. In addition, Japan obtained enormous reparations from Qing in recognition of its ownership of the Liaolong Peninsula. The Qing defeat was met with great shock around the world. The Qing was a great power and feared as a sleeping lion. Western countries had avoided all-out war with the Qing. This defeat marked the beginning of Western colonization of China. The war with Qing was a war over the independence of Korea, but the decision was made without taking into account the intentions of the Korean government. After this defeat, Qing gradually reduced its involvement in Korea. In July 1894, after driving out the Qing troops from Hansong, Daewongun returned to power in Korea with the help of Japan. In July 1895, Queen Min, who had been ousted from power, attempted a coup with the help of Russian troops in an attempt to regain power. Japanese soldiers stationed at the palace, sensing a crisis in Queen Min's decision to use Russian power to stage a coup, stormed the palace and brutally murdered her. Attempts were made to cover up the murder, but it was witnessed by Americans and Russians, turning it into an international incident. The Korean people were outraged by the Queen's murder, which led to anti-Japanese and anti-government movements. Gwangyo, the husband of Queen Min, came to power with the help of Russia. His father, Daewongun, was overthrown. Gwangyo also relied on Russia to run the government, even conducting political affairs at the Russian embassy. Thus, after the First Sino-Japanese War, the conflict over Korea shifted to a rivalry between Japan and Russia. At that time, Korea was still a weak and insignificant entity, completely isolated from the rest of the world. Next time, I will explain the relationship between Japan and Korea during the Russo-Japanese War. If you found this interesting, please subscribe to my channel and click the like button.